Hello and welcome. I'm Asima Katauka and you're watching the NewsX Eurozone. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. The Russian Defense Ministry has reported that Russian forces have successfully captured the Danilivka and Sinelnikove regions in eastern Ukraine. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Zelenskyy is visiting troops fighting in the Kyiv direction in Ukraine's southeast. Today marks 10 years after the November 13, 2015 Paris terror attacks that has killed 130 people and injured over 400 people. Now France prepares national tributes led by President Emmanuel Macron at a new memorial garden in Paris as the nation reaffirms its commitment to. China's President Xi Jinping tells Spain's King Felipe that Beijing wants stronger EU cooperation and constructive global partnership. The visit comes as China seeks EU support amid trade tensions, while Spain looks for greater economic security and investment. Swiss Economy Minister Guy Parmelin and U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer are holding crucial talks in Washington to reduce U.S. President Donald Trump's 39% import tariffs on Swiss goods. British e-commerce giant ASOS has announced $319 million refinancing deal to boost liquidity and cut interest costs by £5 million annually, lifting its shares by 4% as the online retailer struggles with weak demand and stiff competition. The UK has chosen Wilfa in North Wales as the site for its first small nuclear modular reactor power station as part of $3.36 billion plan to boost energy security and cut emissions. These mini reactors will power 3 million homes and create 3,000 jobs, despite U.S. criticism over Britain rejecting project backed by Washington. Moldova's largest Orthodox body, the Moldova Metropolis, declared it is free and independent and not a Russian church. Amid growing tensions over the war in Ukraine, the split highlights religious and political divisions in Moldova as the government strongly opposes Moscow's war efforts. Dutch Economy Minister Karamanz has announced that a Dutch delegation will travel to China early next week, emphasizing the country's commitment to diplomatic engagement in coordination with European and international partners, signaling improved trade relations between these two nations in months. The Russian Defense Ministry has reported that Russian forces have successfully captured the Danilivka and Sinelnikove regions in eastern Ukraine. These strategic gains represent significant advances by Russian troops in their ongoing military operations in the Donetsk and the Dnipropetrovsk regions, which have been key battlegrounds since the escalation of the conflict. The capture of these territories is seen as part of Russia's broader objective to consolidate control over critical areas of eastern Ukraine, particularly in the Donbas region, where fighting has intensified. Danilivka is located in the northeastern part of Donetsk Oblast, while Sinelnikov lies in the southern part of the Dnipropetrovsk region, an area with both military and logistical importance. Now we welcome Mark Sutherland. He's a geopolitical commentator, joins us live from London. Thank you very much, Mark, for joining us again. Good to have you back with us. Now, how might Russia's capture of these two regions alter the strategic balance of frontline dynamics in eastern Ukraine, as we hear a lot of course, Russian claims of gaining momentum in frontline and Ukraine pushing back as well. These are not verified so independently, but we hear it from Russian side, from of course Russian journalists, reporters, and Ukrainian side from, of course, Ukrainian side only.
Asuma, good to be with you. I think let's start off by saying you're quite right in saying we're yet to have various things confirmed, but it is about consolidation. I note President Trump's comments with Viktor Orban of Hungary, where he was asked about the Ukraine-Russian war, the Russian war with Ukraine, as they did invade a sovereign state in February 2022. And we must never forget that. That's why I keep re-emphasizing that. But there's something that President Trump said, that this is not ending at this present time. As he said, I want this war to end. We all believe that it's going to end. That is another discussion, because it isn't ending right now. But as President Trump said, there seems to be no interest in regard to Russia ending it right now. And I think that maybe that's reflecting on what you have just been reporting on in the Donetsk and the Donbass area, that they are then consolidating what they have then taken in regard to their advantage into Ukraine. So that, of course, is all up in the air. That is what they are then doing. We've then got to bear in mind in regard to how the weather will change, and how then that affects the military movements on the ground. Asuma.
And in fact, what implications could these territorial gains have for current Ukraine's defensive posture and the future for entire Western military support?
But if we take this as a whole, there is no doubt about it. Understandably, the Ukrainians are fighting for the sovereignty of their country. Russia turns around and says, we basically, within the ideology, says that we wish to have a government in Kyiv that is pro-Russian. They also want a buffer zone in regard to NATO. They do not want to see Ukraine, Article 5, then joining NATO at all. There is so much within this whole subject, within what has happened since February 2022. And also, as we have to remember, that the Russians are so good at propaganda. But we also bear in mind, we look at all the drone strikes on the energy infrastructure on both sides. And I understand that if we look at this, we read around certain subjects, that the Russians have then really increasing their drone technology to create like a drone battalion within their military structure. So how does this play out? The fact that the Ukrainians are digging in as much as they can to then defend their country, and the Russians are turning around and saying, well, we've gone into Donbass, we've gone into Donetsk, and we wish to keep that territory. So there is a face-off here, and also within Europe, and you're quite right to raise that. How will this play out in regard to NATO then supporting Ukraine? How does this play out in regard to the fact that Ukraine, the military hardware that's sold by the Americans, NATO then buying that, or the European Union buying that, and then passing that on? That is all part of this mix. And as Donald Trump has constantly said, you know, NATO, Europe, you've got to step up. You can't just rely on us, and that has been going on over the last few months. So it's gonna be. We have to keep an eye on what's happening. We have to keep an eye on manufacturing installations in regard to Europe, because suddenly are more of those manufacturing industries that are producing domestic goods are going to start producing goods that will help militarily. All
Yes.
of this is on the table, and just finally, Asuma, you know, sort of cynically, when people see that countries' economies are in such a mess, that one way out of this is then to participate in war and have a war. That may sound a very cynical thing to say, but all of this has to be stepped back and reflected on and looked at. Asuma.
Yes, And Mark, also we know that G7 recently was discussing on supporting Ukraine further. So how do you think this G7's discussion on supporting Ukraine, how do you think the G7's topic around Ukraine was shaped by these, even though could be propaganda, but these claims of, Russian advancements, and do you think there could be any change in strategy in aiding Ukraine, as we hear this a lot from, even though you did mention rightfully that, Russia is so good at spreading propaganda, and also, do you think there among the member states in G7 could also the large-scale corruption that we heard a few days ago from Ukraine, do you think that could affect further foreign aid inflows towards Ukraine from the G7 nations?
Well, as your next guest will most probably be discussing what in regard to reflecting on that, on the fraud and the investigation of that in Ukraine. And of course, many people in America and around have been very concerned about where we look at Biden, the Biden administration, and how much money that then piled into the Ukraine. Where has that money gone? Has it gone into places where it shouldn't have been? All of that is up in the air. And you raise a very good point in regard to groups like G7 and other economic power playing groups that get together. There is this, we hear the public statements at the end. We're not fully aware of some of those private conversations that are then happened. And we also have to bear in mind that under the Biden regime, how many conversations we're having with Putin to in fact stop this war, along with other European countries, to actually then bring the war to a halt. I can't count that many off one hand, because I don't think they really existed. This is going to, sadly, at the moment, if you're asking me that straight question, I don't see an end to this right now as much as I want to see an end to it. You and I have had discussions, I've had other discussions with Thomas,
yes,
etc. We have had these discussions on this program where we are reporting on they're taking this village, they're taking that village, they're holding the line, whether
yes,
that's infrastructure damage, etc. But they don't seem to be coming to the table to actually end this. And as President Trump said to Prime Minister Orbán, Putin, the Russians don't want to end it right now. And we're seeing, as we said, we've seen that consolidation in Donbass, in Donetsk region for a reason in
yes,
regard to Russia's turning around and saying, we want this buffer, we want this territory. Asuma.
Yes, indeed. With that, I would like to thank Mark Sutherland for joining us as a geopolitical commentator from London. Thank you very much. Now, staying on this topic, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has visited troops stationed in the Kyiv direction, located in the southeastern part of Ukraine, as part of a morale-boosting mission and to show support for Ukrainian forces on the front lines. The Kyiv area is situated in the Zaporizhzhia region and has been one of the focal points of intense fighting since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. It lies in close proximity to critical supply routes and is strategically important due to its location near the southern front, close to both the Donetsk and Crimean regions. The visit by President Zelenskyy comes at a time when Ukrainian forces have been engaged in ongoing operation to regain territory from Russian troops in this contested region. Kyiv, which was briefly captured by Russian forces earlier in the invasion, has seen repeated battles as Ukrainian forces attempt to push back against Russian advances. The region is part of the broader southern front, where Ukraine is focusing its counteroffensives aimed at retaking occupied territories and weakening Russia's hold on key strategic areas. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has ordered sanctions on an associate and former business partner at the heart of a major corruption scandal rocking Kyiv during a time of war. Zelenskyy's office has published a decree imposing personal special economic sanctions on Timur Mindich, who is a 46-year-old businessman that includes a freeze on his assets as well. This comes as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy faces the biggest corruption scandal of his 6-year presidency, and as investigators accuse his former business partner Mindich of leading a multi-million-dollar bribery scheme. Ukraine's National Anti-Corruption Bureau says that Mindich led a group that received bribes and kickbacks worth about $100 million from contractors of state-owned energy company in exchange for protecting their business deals. Now for this discussion, we welcome Alison Mutler. She's a former AP Bureau Chief joins us live from Bucharest, Romania. Thank you very much, Alison, for joining us again. Good to see you.
Hello.
Hi. Alison, now looking at this, how could this corruption scandal affect Ukraine now?
Well, it's very important in a bad way, in the sense that it's massive. We're talking about $100 million, I think, money laundering scheme, basically corruption of one of Zelensky's former close associates. So it's very bad for morale in Ukraine, because you have ordinary people struggling as the winter sets in to heat their homes, and they see those who are at the top of government or the elite siphoning off their money. So that will undermine support for the government, perhaps not necessarily for the war efforts, but it will make people be more despondent and disappointed, which is very bad. But it's also very important for Zelenskyy, who is trying to drum up support, very important support, as the winter sets in and Russia is launching these offensives, particularly in East Ukraine, but also in the south, as you mentioned in your report. He really needs to show a cleaner Ukraine, that he is serious about tackling corruption. And we're not talking about little kickbacks here and there, we're talking about major corruption. And this was obviously a very, very big scheme and went on for quite a long time. So it's very important, both domestically and also internationally, for Ukraine, for Zelenskyy to be seen to be tackling this problem. And he has, in the sense that these assets have been frozen, but also the justice and the energy minister resigned yesterday. So it's important to be seen to be taking action, to be investigating, because why would anybody in the EU want to free up money for Ukraine if there is such high-level corruption? And we know that also Ukraine wants to join the EU, and one of the prerequisites of joining the EU, I'm in Romania, which also joined the EU, is cleaning up corruption, and that's very important. So he can't afford not to take action.
Yes, talking about the EU, how do you think this is impacting European confidence in Ukraine's governance and ongoing support for Kyiv? And also, could this scandal influence Ukraine's EU accession prospects in any way?
Well, the fact that there is an investigation that his former associates' assets have been frozen, and two government, it's very senior energy and justice ministers have resigned. This shows that Ukraine is taking action, and this is designed to reassure the European Union that Ukraine is serious about cracking down on very high-level corruption. So this is the message that Zelenskyy is sending out to Brussels, but also locally as well, domestically as well. But it could undermine support. I mean, if we have some members of the EU sitting on the fence, we have a skeptic is Hungary and Slovakia, they will use this as another reason to say, look, there's so much corruption in this country, it's not ready to join the EU. And it's not ready to join the EU, otherwise it would be in the EU. But what is important is that Ukraine takes the necessary steps to be eligible to join the EU, and this obviously is a very important step they've taken. But the investigation has to continue. It can't just be a press release and two ministers resign. It has to be a proper investigation, and so that this will reassure both his domestic audience, his voters, and also Brussels.
Alison, as you emphasize that, the freezing of assets and two ministers are resigning, do you think this is enough for Ukraine or Zelensky's government to gain the trust back of Ukrainian citizens and also European EU or the coalition of the willing partners, and what steps should European policymakers encourage to ensure that Ukraine's anti-corruption efforts remain credible?
I think it's an important first step, and these were not small measures. It's not like we're doing an internal investigation. Assets were frozen, heads rolled, the ministers have been forced to step down. So I think it's very important, but it has to continue. You can't just say, oh, we've done this, let's tick this box, forget it, we haven't got corruption anymore. It's clear that if we have this level of corruption, there is a lot of corruption in Ukraine. And I know as from Romania, which joined the European Union, joining the European Union does reduce corruption. But the other thing is it doesn't happen overnight, because corruption is not just about money, it's about a mentality, it's about a culture in which corruption is accepted. And that is something, not just opening corruption investigations and probes, which are important, but also sending a message that if you are in high office, that if you hold an official position, it's not an excuse for taking. The anti-corruption effort isn't just about cracking down on high-level corruption or corruption in hospitals or in factories or in state institutions. It's also about delivering a message that it's not all right to be corrupt if you're in a position of authority. So I think Zelensky's European backers, and Ukraine is very strongly backed by Europe, will be sending this message. And we shouldn't forget the EU has worked with a lot of countries where there was very high level corruption, to Bulgaria, Romania, I mean even now Hungary, Greece, etc. So they are very used to corrupt countries and educating them to become less corrupt. And as I said, it's both a question of making sure there are checks and balances in place to stop the corruption, but it's also important about there being a cultural message that corruption is not acceptable.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for sharing that powerful message over here, Alison. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now we stay in the region. EU finance ministers are meeting in Brussels to discuss the economic and financial agenda of the bloc, including the increasingly urgent question of funding for Ukraine. The European Commission still hopes to convene the member states, and especially Belgium, as it continues to block the proposal amid legal fears to go ahead with a 140 billion euros reparations loan based on frozen Russian assets. President Ursula von der Leyen insists that it would be the most effective way to sustain Ukraine's defense and its economy. Now we welcome back Alison Mutler. She's a former AP Bureau Chief, joins us live from Bucharest, Romania. Thank you very much, Alison, for staying with us. Now looking at this, as we were just talking about, not making sure the corruption is not normalized, and we see this division and fatigue over supporting Ukraine, and you mentioned a few countries in our earlier discussion. What would be the broader geopolitical consequences for Europe if the bloc fails to agree on sustained financial support for Ukraine now? We seem to have lost connection with Alison, but we are going to move on to our next. Now we stay in this topic. Be through bilateral loans, grants, or through frozen assets. Let's in fact listen into what the Dutch minister has said.
Dreigt op heel veel manieren Europa. Laten we ons daar niet gek door maken. Het gaat hier om de zorg van de Belgen. Daar moeten we goed naar luisteren. Moeten we kijken hoe we dat daarmee om kunnen gaan. Nogmaals, in het belang dat we middelen kunnen vrijmaken om Oekraïne te steunen, die dagelijks onder vuur ligt van hetzelfde Rusland.
Now we move on. A German court has rejected shareholders' bid for a larger share of Wirecard's remaining assets. The company collapsed in 2022 following a massive financial scandal involving 1.9 billion euros missing from accounts. Around 50,000 shareholders, including Union Investment, claimed that they should rank alongside creditors in insolvency proceedings, but the court rejected this argument. Judges strongly remarked that the shareholders must bear the risks of ownership even if frauded. Now, Wirecard's remaining assets are estimated at 650 million euros, while outstanding claims from creditors, investors, and other parties total 15.4 billion euros. This very clearly indicates that most shareholders will likely receive nothing. In related news, Austria is currently reviewing the possibility of stripping citizenship from former Wirecard executive Jan Marsalek, who has been fugitive since 2020 and is believed to be staying in Russia. Now we move on to Britain. Britain's Prime Minister Keir Starmer has apologized to Health Secretary Wes Streeting after reports accused him of plotting a leadership coup. The apology follows a briefing war inside Number 10. One insider compared it to an episode of Celebrity Traitors. Starmer has ordered a leak inquiry to find out who was behind the claims. Streeting hit back, calling the attacks toxic and juvenile, and urged the UK's Prime Minister to sack those responsible. Labour Party Chair Anna Turley says Starmer is determined to stamp out the culture of internal attacks and insists the briefings were not authorised by him. The row comes as Labour's poll numbers slide, with the party now trailing Nigel Farage's Reform UK in recent surveys. Now we switch to Asia. Pakistan's Interior Minister Mohsin Naqvi says both suicide bombers behind this week's deadly attacks were Afghan nationals. The twin blasts targeted security and civilian areas, heightening tensions along the Pakistan-Afghanistan border. Authorities say investigations are underway as Islamabad presses Kabul to act against militant groups operating from Afghan soil. And that's a wrap on the NewsX Eurozone. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.